Most righteous greetings, dudes and dudettes. Most bodacious of you to join us for this podcasting experience. It's your host, Shaun here. Just a few quick announcements. And some shout outs as well. Happy birthday, Amy. Hope you had a rad birthday. Shout out to you and Peter. A few other ones we're going to smash through here. A few of our Sniperoo army. Hashtag Sniperoo crew. Ugh, that's so lame. Kelly Bath, Nick Charles, Jen Mack, cheers for your Insta love. Troy Higgins. Go check out Robots for Eyes and Bro Honey. They just did a crossover episode this weekend, so much excitement. Ben Walter, Emily Fuller, Luke McCallum, Mike Huell, Chris Morton. We're getting all of our new stickers in this week, so everyone that hasn't got them yet, hit us up and I'll send them out. That means all of yous overseas as well will finally be doing our shipment over to America, to the old US of A, and also to the United Kingdom, so all you dudes will be sending a big bunch over to the old Robots crew, and everyone in the Ingerland can finally get some dope-ass sticker action up in you. Also, we've got our book going into pre-production this month, so if you want to be a dope-ass motherfucker and you have a limited edition run of the first ever print of Tales from the Sniper's Nest by Carousel Sniper Victim, you're going to have to let us know, because that shit will be happening in the next few months. Alright, enough from me. Enjoy the show.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
You're listening to Carousel Sniper Victim, a Dead Glass Design production, with your host, Shaun Jeffery.
Oh my God! Look at that!
Yeah, thank God she's a half a mile away.
She's loaded, boys! You gotta get out of here! It's full of explosives!
Children, come on.
Oh no. No, get out of here! Vince!
Come back in the schoolyard.
Please get these children out of here! That ship is gonna blow! No!
Mr. Coleman.
Hurry! Hurry! You gotta get these people out of here! That ship is gonna blow! The train.
What?
People, get out of here! It's gonna blow up! Mission ship on fire. Stop train. Please, God, answer.
Coleman! There's no time!
The train's coming in towards Pier 6. I've got to warn you.
Come on, Vince! Come on!
There are 700 people aboard it. I've got to stop it! Come on, acknowledge!
Hello, everyone. Bonjour à tous. On December 6, 1917, two ships collided in the narrows of the Halifax Harbour, one of them a munitions ship bound for the battlefields of the First World War. The tragedy devastated Halifax, but Nova Scotians responded with courage and heroism, like Vincent Coleman, the railway dispatcher who gave his life to warn incoming trains of the danger. Communities across the province also offered relief and support, and help poured in beyond our borders, from Massachusetts to Australia.
The year 1917 was a busy year for humanity. Albert Einstein was publishing his first paper on cosmology. Harry Houdini was wowing audiences around the world performing his famous buried alive stunt. World War I was raging all across Europe. In April, the United States would declare war on Germany as well, throwing herself into the Great War. In July, the Bolsheviks seized control of the Russian government. And in the World Series, Chicago White Sox beat the New York Giants 4-2. On December 6th, though, the quiet coastal town of Halifax, Nova Scotia, was rocked by the largest man-made explosion the world had ever seen. Just before the First World War, the Canadian government began a determined costly effort to develop the harbour and waterfront facilities surrounding the Halifax and Dartmouth regions. As the Royal Canadian Navy had virtually no seaworthy ships of its own, the Royal Navy assumed responsibility for maintaining Atlantic trade routes by readopting Halifax as its North American base of operations for the Great War. In 1915, management of the harbour fell under the control of the Royal Canadian Navy, under the supervision of Captain Superintendent Edward Harrington Martin. By 1917, there was a growing naval fleet in Halifax. This included patrol ships, tugboats, and minesweepers. The population of the Halifax and Dartmouth regions had increased to between 60,000 and 65,000 people by the year 1917. Convoys carried men, animals, and supplies to the European theatre of war. The two main points of departure were in Nova Scotia, at Sydney on Cape Breton Island, and at the ports in Halifax. Hospital ships brought the wounded to the city, and a new military hospital was constructed there to accommodate the wounded. The success of German U-boat attacks on Allied ships crossing the Atlantic Ocean led the Allies to institute a convoy system to reduce losses while transporting goods and soldiers to Europe. Merchant ships gathered at Bedford Basin, on the northwestern end of the harbour, which was protected by two sets of anti-submarine nets and guarded by patrol ships of the Royal Canadian Navy. The convoys departed under the protection of British cruisers and destroyers. A large army garrison protected the city with forts, gun batteries, and anti-submarine nets. These factors drove a major military, industrial, and residential expansion of the city, and the weight of goods passing through the harbour increased nearly ninefold. All neutral ships bound for ports in North America were required to report to Halifax for inspection. The Norwegian ship, the SS Imo, had sailed from the Netherlands en route to New York to take on relief supplies for Belgium. The ship arrived in Halifax on the 3rd of December for neutral inspection and spent 2 days in Bedford Basin awaiting refuelling supplies. Though given clearance to leave the port on the 5th of December, Imo's departure was delayed because her coal load did not arrive until late that afternoon. The loading of fuel was not completed until after the anti-submarine nets had been raised for the night. Therefore, the vessel could not weigh anchor until the next morning. This is one of those little glitches in the matrix, so to speak, that will have far-reaching ramifications for thousands, if not millions of people. Had the SS Imo left harbour that night, history may have been very different. The French cargo ship, the SS Mont-Blanc, arrived from New York late on the 5th of December. The vessel was fully loaded with the explosives TNT and picric acid, as well as the highly flammable fuel benzol and gun cotton. All Allied ships carrying dangerous cargo into the harbours were supposed to fly warning flags to alert other ships to the dangers they posed. But due to the present danger of German submarines, the regulations were changed so that the ships transporting the dangerous cargo wouldn't be advertising themselves as perfect targets for a German torpedo. The SS Mont-Blanc intended to join a slow-moving convoy gathering in Bedford Basin, readying to depart for Europe. However, the Mont-Blanc was too late to enter the harbour before the submarine nets were raised for the evening. So here we find ourselves, with the SS Imo wanting to leave the port of Halifax, already running late, and the SS Mont-Blanc wanting to arrive and enter the port, nervous about their dangerous cargo. However, the submarine nets have been raised for the evening. Both ships now find themselves anchored, waiting for morning, when the ships can both leave and enter the port respectively. Navigating into or out of Bedford Basin required passage through a strait called the Narrows. Ships were expected to keep to the starboard, the right-hand side of the channel as they passed oncoming traffic. In other words, vessels were required to pass port to port. 2 lanes of traffic, keep to your side. Simple. Ships were restricted to a speed of 5 knots, around 9.3 kilometres or 5.8 miles per hour, whilst they were within the harbour. The SS Imo was granted clearance to leave Bedford Basin by signals from the guard ship Acadia at approximately 7:30 a.m. on the morning of the 6th of December, with pilot William Hayes on board. All ships arriving at the harbour received a local pilot aboard to help them navigate through the busy shipping channels. The ship entered the Narrows well above the harbour's speed limit, in an attempt to make up for the delay experienced in loading her coal. As she was heading out of the basin, the SS Imo met the American tramp steamer SS Clara being piloted up the wrong, western side of the harbour. The pilots agreed to pass starboard to starboard, passing on the wrong side. Soon afterwards, the SS Imo was forced to head even further towards the Dartmouth shore, the wrong side of the channel, after passing the tugboat Stella Maris, which was travelling up the harbour to Bedford Basin near mid-channel. The captain of the tugboat Stella Maris saw the SS Imo approaching at excessive speed and ordered his ship closer to the western shore. Basically, for some reason this morning in Halifax, harbour traffic is all over the place. 3 ships have already passed each other on the incorrect side, and things are only going to get a lot worse. Meanwhile, aboard the SS Mont-Blanc, Francis Mackey, an experienced harbour pilot, had boarded the ship on the evening of the 5th of December, 1917. He had asked about, quote, special protections, such as a guard ship. Given the Mont-Blanc's cargo, the ship was essentially an enormous, slow-moving bomb, but no protections were put in place. The following morning, the Mont-Blanc started moving at 7:30 a.m, the 6th of December, and was the second ship to enter the harbour as the anti-submarine nets between George's Island and Pier 21 opened for the morning traffic. Mont-Blanc headed towards Bedford Basin on the Dartmouth side of the harbour, the correct side. Mackey kept his eye on the ferry traffic between Halifax and Dartmouth and other small boats in the area. He first spotted the SS Imo when she was only about 0.75 miles or 1.21 kilometres away. He became concerned as her path appeared to be heading towards his ship's starboard side, as if to cut off his own course. The ship was going to pass straight in front of the Mont-Blanc, crossing into the wrong shipping lane. They were on a direct collision course. Mackey gave a short blast of his ship's signal whistle to indicate that he had the right of way, but was met with 2 short blasts from Imo, indicating that the approaching vessel would not yield its position. The captain ordered the Mont-Blanc to halt her engines and angle slightly to starboard, closer to the Dartmouth side of the Narrows. He let out another single blast of his whistle, hoping the other vessel would likewise move to starboard, but was again met with a double blast. The SS Imo wasn't going to give way. Sailors on nearby ships heard the series of signals and, realising that a collision was imminent, gathered to watch as the SS Imo bore down on the SS Mont-Blanc. Both ships had cut their engines by this point, but their momentum carried them right on top of each other at a slow speed. Unable to ground his ship for fear of a shockwave that would set off his explosive cargo, Mackey ordered the Mont-Blanc to steer hard to port and cross the bow of the Imo in a last-second bid to avoid a collision. The 2 ships were almost parallel to each other when Imo suddenly sent out 3 signal blasts, indicating the ship was reversing its engines. The combination of the cargoless ship's height in the water and the transverse thrust of her right-hand propeller caused the ship's head to swing into the Mont-Blanc. The SS Imo's prow pushed into the number 1 hold of the Mont-Blanc on her starboard side at 8:45 a.m. The damage to Mont-Blanc was not too severe though. At least, that's what everyone thought to begin with. When the two ships collided, the resulting force knocked over barrels that broke open and flooded the deck with benzol that quickly flowed into the hold. As the SS Imo's engines kicked in, she quickly disengaged from the hull of the Mont-Blanc. Hundreds of tons of shipping steel grinding against each other, which in turn created sparks inside the Mont-Blanc's hull. These sparks ignited the vapours from the spilled benzol. A fire started at the waterline and travelled quickly up the side of the ship as the benzol spewed out from the crushed drums on the Mont-Blanc's decks. The fire quickly became uncontrollable. Surrounded by thick, acrid black smoke, and fearing that she would explode almost immediately, the captain ordered the crew of the Mont-Blanc to abandon ship. A growing number of Halifax citizens gathered on the street or stood at the windows of their homes or businesses to watch the spectacular fire. The frantic crew of the Mont-Blanc shouted from their 2 lifeboats to some of the other vessels that their ship was about to explode, but they could not be heard above the noise and confusion, or people didn't understand French. As the lifeboats made their way across the harbour to the Dartmouth shore, the abandoned ship continued to drift and beached herself at Pier 6 near the foot of Richmond Street, an extremely busy and densely populated industrial area. Towing 2 barges at the time of the collision, the tugboat Stella Maris responded immediately to the fire, anchoring her 2 barges and steaming back towards Pier 6 to spray the burning ship with her fire hose. The tug's captain, Horatio H. Brennan, and his crew realised that the fire was too intense for their single hose and backed off from the burning Mont-Blanc. They were approached by a whaler from the HMS High Flyer, and later, a second ship belonging to the HMCS Niobe. Captain Brennan and Albert Madison of the Niobe agreed to secure a line to the French ship's stern so as to pull it away from the pier to avoid setting it on fire. A 5-inch, 127mm hawser, which is a nautical term for a thick cable or rope used in mooring or towing a ship, was initially produced but was deemed too small, and orders for a 10-inch, 254mm hawser were sent. The ship had to be pulled away from the pier, or a real disaster was imminent. It was at this point that the SS Mont-Blanc exploded. At 35 seconds past 9:04 a.m, the out-of-control fire on board the SS Mont-Blanc set off her highly explosive cargo. The ship was completely blown apart and a powerful blast wave radiated away from the explosion at more than 1,000 metres, 3,300 feet per second. Temperatures of 5,000 degrees Celsius, 9,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and pressures of thousands of atmospheres accompanied the moment of detonation at the epicentre of the explosion. White-hot shards of iron fell down upon Halifax and Dartmouth. The Mont-Blanc's forward 90mm gun, its barrel having now melted away, was launched and landed approximately 5.6 kilometres, 3.5 miles north of the explosion site, and a piece of her anchor, weighing half a tonne, landed 3.2 kilometres or 2 miles south at a location named Armdale. A cloud of white-hot smoke rose to over 3,600 metres, 11,800 feet. The shockwave from the blast travelled through the earth at nearly 23 times the speed of sound and was felt as far away as Cape Breton, 207 kilometres or 129 miles away. An area of over 160 hectares, 400 acres, was completely destroyed by the explosion, and the harbour floor was momentarily exposed by the volume of water that was displaced. A tsunami was formed by water surging in to fill the void, It rose as high as 18 metres, 60 feet, above the high water mark on the Halifax side of the harbour. Over 1,600 people were killed instantly, and 9,000 were injured. More than 300 of those injured would later die. Every building within a 2.6 kilometre, 1.6 mile radius, it's over 12,000 buildings in total, were destroyed or badly damaged. Hundreds of people who had been watching the fire from their homes were blinded when the blast wave shattered the windows in front of them. It was the biggest mass blinding ever recorded to date in North America. Stoves and lamps overturned by the force of the blast sparked fires throughout Halifax, particularly in the north end of the city where entire city blocks were caught up in the inferno, trapping residents inside their houses. Firefighter Billy Wells, who was thrown away from the explosion and had his clothes torn from his body, described the devastation survivors faced. The sight was awful, with people hanging out of their windows dead, some with their heads missing, and some thrown onto the overhead telegraph wires. He was the only member of the 8-man crew of the fire engine Patricia to survive. The force of the explosion was so powerful that when it blew him from the driver's seat of the fire engine, a piece of the steering wheel was still in his hand when he woke up later in a nearby field. Large brick and stone factories near Pier 6, such as the Acadia Sugar Refinery, disappeared into unrecognisable heaps of rubble, killing most of the workers. The Nova Scotia cotton mill, located 1.5 kilometres, 0.9 miles from the blast, was destroyed by fire and the collapse of its concrete floors. The Royal Naval College of Canada building was badly damaged as well, and several cadets and instructors maimed. The Richmond railway yards and station were destroyed, killing 55 railway workers and destroying and damaging over 500 railway cars. The North Street station too, one of the busiest in Canada, was also badly damaged. The death toll, however, could have been a lot higher, had it not been for the selfless act of one railway telegraph operator, Patrick Vincent, or Vince, Coleman. Coleman was operating at the rail yard about 750 feet or 230 metres from Pier 6, where the explosion occurred. He and his co-worker, William Lovett, learned of the dangerous cargo aboard the burning Mont-Blanc from a sailor and began to flee. But then Coleman had a horrible realisation. Coleman remembered that an incoming passenger train from St. John, New Brunswick, was due to arrive at the rail yard within minutes. If the train rolled into the station as the explosion occurred, hundreds more would be killed. Someone had to warn them. Coleman returned to his post alone, as everyone else had already begun to flee the station. He continued to send out urgent telegraph messages to stop the incoming trains. Several variations of the messages have been reported, among them this one from the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic. Quote, "Hold up the train. Ammunition ship afire in harbour making for Pier 6 and will explode. Guess this will be my last message. Goodbye, boys." Coleman's message was responsible for bringing all incoming trains around Halifax to a halt. It was heard by other stations all along the Intercolonial Railway, helping railway officials to respond immediately to the disaster. Passenger train number 10, the overnight train from St. John, is believed to have heeded the warning and stopped a safe distance from the blast at a station in Rockingham, saving the lives of at least 300 railway passengers. Coleman himself was killed at his post as the explosion ripped through the city. He was honoured with a Heritage Minute in the 1990s and inducted into the Canadian Railway Hall of Fame. A fraction of a second. That's the duration of the explosion that blew apart the Mont-Blanc and caused such colossal damage in Halifax Harbour. It's crazy how much can change in such a small amount of time. The harbourside cities of Dartmouth and Halifax would never be the same again. Amidst the devastation, though, there were tiny miracles. The tiniest, perhaps, being 23-month-old Annie Liggins. Annie's family lived on Flynn Block, which was very close to the harbour. Her mother, Anne, and brother Edwin had been watching the ships, curious about the cause of the initial explosions, when the devastating blast occurred. Both were killed, and their home was flattened. The morning after, a soldier thought he heard a sound coming from the cellar of the house. Private Benjamin Henneberry, whose own children were missing, assumed it may be one of his kids. In response to his shouts for help, troops rushed in to assist him. Under the still smouldering remains of the collapsed building, they found little Annie, burned but very much alive. She had been under a stove sheltered by an ash can. The heat from the stove kept her from freezing during the blizzard for 26 hours after the explosion, and she became known as Ashpan Annie. Annie lived to be 95 years old. Around 300 metres from the SS Mont-Blanc, when the explosion occurred, was Edward McCrossan, an able seaman aboard the SS Caracas, and he would become a living witness to the greatest loss of life aboard any ship in the wake of the Halifax explosion. McCrossan was eating breakfast below deck when he heard someone shout that there was about to be a collision in the harbour. He emerged to see the SS Imo run into the Mont-Blanc. As fire sparked and spread on the Mont-Blanc, McCrossan saw its crew abandon ship and heard them yelling in French as they rowed away. As the flaming Mont-Blanc drifted closer, no one on the Caracas knew the danger that they were really in. McCrossan said he ducked below decks for just a moment to roll a cigarette when he felt the deafening blast. The explosion wrenched the Caracas from its moorings on the pier and blew the ship across the Narrows. It partially sank near Tufts Cove on the Dartmouth shore, one half of its gutted frame sticking out of the water. According to the Royal Navy's port convoy officer, the Caracas had been carried across either by the explosion or the resulting wave. By McCrossan's own account in the Evening Mail newspaper, of the 67 people who had been on board, 55 were dead. McCrossan lived to tell his story, and it would appear it was his fateful detour below deck to roll a quick smoke that actually saved him. When the Mont-Blanc caught on fire and the ammunition on board started to go off, Mary Minnie Jackson McGrath, like many Haligonians, was curious to see what was making the racket. McGrath lived with her parents and 2-year-old son Clifford on Duffer Street. She had just fed Clifford breakfast and settled him down for a nap when she, her mother and her sister gathered by the window to watch the burning ship in the harbour. McGrath's mum suggested she go to alert the neighbours to the spectacle. McGrath ran across the street and was just about to pound on the neighbour's door when the massive explosion happened. The force of the blast flung her into a nearby field in the city's north end. When McGrath came to, she didn't recognise her surroundings at all. Not only that, but her clothes had been blown off and there was a huge piece of shrapnel in her leg. There was also a baby nearby, badly injured but still moving. Assuming it to be Clifford, McGrath picked up the child and started walking around. A man spotted her, wrapped his overcoat around her and took the dying baby from her arms. McGrath was eventually put on a train to Truro and stayed in a convalescent home to ease her residual shock. Around Christmas, McGrath was visited by her Aunt Ada, the bearer of awful news. McGrath's son, mother, sister, and brother had all died in the explosion. The blast shot all manner of glass and other debris into the air the moment it happened. More than 1,000 residents lost their sight that day as a result. One of the victims to suffer an eye injury was 13-year-old Frances Priest. Frances and her sister Florence had come from England several years earlier to learn to be domestic servants after the premature death of their parents. Frances was working for a family on North Street when the blast occurred. Glass shards ended up in one of her eyes and she was immediately sent to hospital. Doctors had to remove the damaged eye and put in an artificial glass one. In the weeks after the explosion, medical staff did approximately 250 such eye removals, and hundreds more people were left with glass embedded in their eyes. It is estimated 1 in 50 people in Halifax were blinded or had significant eye damage as a result of the explosion. This widespread tragedy did lead to the formation of the Canadian National Institute for the Blind in 1918 though, so silver lining there, I guess. Many people in Halifax at first believed the explosion to be the result of a German attack. The Halifax Herald continued to propagate this belief for some time. For example, reporting that the Germans had mocked victims of the explosion. While John Johansen, the Norwegian helmsman of the SS Imo, was being treated for serious injuries sustained during the explosion, it was reported to the military police that he had been behaving suspiciously. Johansen was arrested on suspicion of being a German spy when a search turned up a letter on his person, supposedly written in German. Haha! Gotcha! It turned out that the letter was actually written in Norwegian. Damn it! Immediately following the explosion, most of the German survivors in Halifax had been rounded up and imprisoned. Eventually the fear dissipated as the real cause of the explosion became known, although rumours of German involvement persisted for years after. Rescue trains began arriving the day of the explosion from across Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, while other trains from central Canada and the northeastern United States were impeded by blizzards. Construction of temporary shelters to house the many people left homeless began almost immediately after the disaster. The initial judicial inquiry found the SS Mont-Blanc to have been responsible for the disaster, but a later appeal determined that both vessels were equally to blame. A year after the disaster, in 1918, the city of Halifax sent a Christmas tree to the city of Boston in thanks and remembrance for the help that the Boston Red Cross and the Massachusetts Public Safety Committee provided immediately after the disaster. That gift was revived in 1971 by the Lunenburg County Christmas Tree Producers Association, which began an annual donation of a large tree to promote Christmas tree exports as well as acknowledge Boston's support after the explosion. Never let a good disaster go to waste, huh? The tree is Boston's official Christmas tree, and it is lit up throughout the holiday season. Having affected virtually every family and working collective in Halifax, the Halifax explosion was incredibly traumatic for the whole surviving community, so the memory was largely suppressed. After the first anniversary, the city stopped commemorating the explosion for decades. The second official commemoration did not take place before the 50th anniversary in 1967, and even after that, the remembrance celebration stopped again. Some memories, it would seem, are just best left in the past.
They can take our bones and bury them deep under the river, but we'll still be together and we cannot be defeated. They can take our trombones and pack them down there with us, but no matter how long it takes us, we will not be defeated. When we dance together under the moon and under the weather.